Welcome to the TRUReform Podcast, where the aim is to transform, reimagine, and unite all towards success, collaboration, and solidarity. I am your host, Nam Solomon, along with Marcus Cherry, host with an S. And today we have Mary Valdovinos with us. So we are very excited to talk with her. And Marcus, tell us a little bit about Mary.
So listen, Mary is first and foremost amazing, right?
Oh,
When
man.
you talk about a great spirit, when you talk about a kind-hearted person, when you talk about a person that actively cares, right? And everybody knows that TRUReform is focused on reentry, support, successes, right? And Mary has a huge heart for the community, man. Just even something personal that I was going through when I spoke to Mary on the phone. You can hear the authenticity inside of her voice, right? So I'm confident that the things that she'll share today will come from love, will come from support, and really at the end of the day, man, just trying to be just another positive figure that men and women can look to for ideas, for feedback, for encouragement when they are just trying to reenter into the world. But I've had the pleasure of working with Mary for the last maybe almost year, right?
Yeah.
So the almost year, and I'm not going to talk about what she does on the professional side because I'll leave that up to her. But just my experience working with her, man, team player, right? All the way in.
Wow.
And every time you see her, she's smiling.
Exciting.
I try.
Exciting.
Excited to have her here today.
Thank you both for having me and inviting me on, Marcus. I appreciate it. Nam, thank you. It means a lot to be joining you today.
So without further ado, I know I didn't want to talk about, anything professional or personal or passion that you're about. Start by telling us a little bit about who is Mary, right?
So who I am today is a little different from who I was even just a few years back, right? Today, Marcus, you touched on it a little bit. I am a professional in the community. I'm a social justice advocate. I'm a mentor to at-risk youth. I'm a care coordinator for victims and offenders of gun violence in the state of Connecticut. And among other things, right? I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend. And much of what I do is based off of my lived experience, right? So whenever you guys want to get into it, let me know, or I can just dive in. Okay, great. So growing up, I was born and raised in Fairfield County, lived in Stamford, moved to Norwalk for middle school, high school. I was a good student. I was mostly a quiet girl until, kind of blossoming in high school. I became more social. All throughout, though, I was a great student. I was involved in extracurricular activities from dance, sports. I played field hockey, lacrosse. I studied Japanese and traveled to Japan. I, high honor roll every semester. Always an overachiever. And, I'm grateful that my parents gave me the opportunities that I was able to have. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be who I am today. With that being said, when I was 17, shortly before my 18th birthday, I was introduced to hard drugs. I became addicted to opiates, specifically heroin. And that's something, if you had even asked me a year before, I would have thought you were crazy. I was naive to the fact that it even existed in my community, right? And certainly I wouldn't have ever believed that I would be one to try it or experiment. So that choice that I made, because it was a choice, certainly took me down a different path. I sometimes say it derailed my path, but it was something that was, and I'm a spiritual person, so I say it was set out by God in some way. And shortly after, I became involved in the legal system. I don't like to say it's the criminal justice system because I feel like it's more unjust than just, but certainly it introduced me to that world. And what came from that was just a whirlwind, downward spiral, and everything that comes with it, right?
Oh, interesting.
Whoa.
So where at this point where you say a downward spiral, because you said you were 18, where did this downward spiral end?
So it landed me in both the state and federal prison systems. Okay. So although my time was brief, less than, a year and a half in total, I only spent a couple of months in the state system, but the federal prison system was a little harder. And as my ventures went on, I have to say, actually, let me rewind. I was arrested 6 times in 1 year. And the crimes that I committed started off as petty crimes, shoplifting. Those were all of the crimes I was arrested for in that year. And I definitely got let off easier than many others, right? Maybe the way I presented myself, the upbringing I had contributed, but I haven't seen the same fate for many people, especially working in this field today. So I was let off a little bit easy, and I think that probably led to me committing bigger crimes. Eventually, I started selling drugs, mainly to support my own addiction, but certainly not thinking about the people I was hurting. And for a long time, I didn't. I would say, well, I'm not hurting anyone but myself, but I'm perpetuating that cycle of hurt. I would say, well, people have to get it somewhere. And that was my way of thinking at that time. Again, I was a hurt person hurting people, and definitely consumed mind, body, and soul by my addiction. So I didn't see with clarity until I became cleaned up. And I again say that was God. My last incarceration, I was in 3 different prisons across the country. And so in total 4, if you count state, Connecticut. And it was an unforgiving incarceration. It was rough. And again, I'll say it was God, because he knew that's what I needed to pull through that addiction. I was stubborn and I was so stuck. I mean, again, I'll use the word consumed. And I like to think of it as a demon, because pulling through that, I mean, I saw little hope for myself. I know how difficult it was, especially kicking at that point. I was addicted to fentanyl. So a 12-year addiction to IV heroin and fentanyl, plus a 10-year addiction to a medication I was introduced to in hopes to save me from this addiction. And that was methadone. So I was dually addicted, and it made it so much harder. But the trajectory I went on, it was nothing but God. Because where I went to prison, they didn't offer any medication assisted treatments, no support. They'd give you Benadryl, but ultimately I was kicking these habits cold turkey. So
What
was
was
it
that
easy?
like? Yeah, what was that like? Like cold turkey, what was that like? Like, were you like in there? Can you explain like how did that feel?
It was awful. It was awful, but it was what I needed. It was painful. It was difficult. A lot of emotional warfare within me. Thoughts of giving up. But what I held on to was knowing that this would soon end. And knowing that if other people were able to pull through anything like this, I found a glimmer of hope that I could too. So I had to hold on to something. It wasn't easy. I had, episodes of, I had a seizure in there where, I mean, I had teeth literally fall out of my mouth. It was
Wow.
rough. And at one point, I honestly, and I say this to few people, but I felt like every tooth in my mouth was loose and would come out. And, the COs would tell me in there, it happens. We've seen it happen. And I would ask them, well, what would other people do? I remember one CO said to me, and she said, I hate to say this to you, but the last guy that was going through this tried to kill himself. And of course that didn't help, but I prayed. There were countless sleepless nights. I was sick. I didn't eat. I lost about 50 pounds. And I'm a small person to begin with, but I held on. I pulled through. And the community of women that I was surrounded by, especially at the worst point in my addiction, I have so much to thank them for, because many of them were supportive. They would come check on me. And a lot of women were incarcerated for similar or the same crimes. A lot of them in their, behind their addiction, many behind men, but similar backstories. And I'm grateful for that.
So,
Hmm.
Mayor, I'm interested in just kind of listen to you talk about like your upbringing, right? And the environment, right? And then something new was introduced to you that kind of took it a life of its own. What principles or uh, uh, what things did you hold on to that you were taught younger, right? Like in that space that helped you kind of go through it? Because I know a lot of times when we go through difficult times, right, we feel like there is no hope, there is no getting out of it. You thought about so many different things, right? Going through that emotional turmoil, what are some of the things you held on to that you learned as a kid or as a young adult that kind of helped pull you through some of those difficult times?
So, strength,
Mm,
first and foremost, my spirituality, my belief in God. I was raised in the Catholic Church. And although obviously my life deterred from much of what I was taught in church, and my ideals didn't align perfectly with that, I would say mostly Christianity at this point because I believed in God. Perhaps I didn't believe it in the way the church taught me. I had to believe, but I believed.
mm,
And family was a huge one for me. Loyalty to family and just unity. Because when I felt like giving up on myself, what motivated me was not hurting them more. So
Hmm.
that was something I held on to. Also, my faith and belief in myself. My mom is a very strong woman. My sister is too. My dad is. We've always looked out for one another. Um, but seeing their strength always inspired me. If they could do this, I can do it too.
mm.
So many of the morals and values I grew up on, some of them got me into trouble, such as loyalty, right? But a lot of them helped me pull through as well.
I want to take a step back for a second, because I was listening to the beautiful introduction. I mean, Japanese, going to Japan, that was amazing. And then you started with opiates. What caused you to take opiates for the first time, and what opiates did you take?
So, geez, what caused me was I have to chalk it up to low self esteem.
Hmm.
I was in a tumultuous relationship very young and introduced to a lifestyle that I wasn't used to myself. I was dating somebody across town, not living in the best area, not hanging around the best people. Soon I started smoking pot, which, a lot of the kids in high school do. I was never much of a drinker, but his family dynamic, the parents in the home were using drugs. And, we never paid attention from that. And a lot of us would hang out there, a few of our friends, but still being exposed to that, I guess, was something new to me. Also, not really being certain where I wanted to go with my life.
Mm.
Thinking, well, I'll just go with the crowd, even though, and I missed this, but I got into Yale out of high school. So, and I kind of just applied like, oh, let's see what happens with this, not expecting I'd be accepted or not. I
Right.
applied to a few schools, and certainly, even though my parents gave me a good upbringing, we were, a low to middle class family. My parents didn't have the means to send me to college. And even though I worked, I didn't think about saving up for school. I didn't think about applying for scholarships. I was not as invested in myself. And it was almost like I did things just to see if I could get it done,
Mm.
Mm.
similar to applying to Yale. Let's see where this goes, right? Not intentional with what I was doing.
Yeah.
So my choice to use drugs was I wasn't hanging out with the best crowd. The first time I tried it, I actually thought it was the crushed pill. And I had tried pills before. I had like my appendix out when I was in high school. And my mom was like, I don't want you to take the medication they gave you. It's very strong. It's a narcotic. And I took it once. It made me sick. So I thought, I'm never going to mess with that again. And this time a friend said, well, it'll make you feel better. And, a little bit of peer pressure I felt. And I definitely succumbed to it. So me thinking, okay, fine, I'll try this crushed pill. What's the worst that's going to happen? I'll get sick. And I certainly did. But it turned out to be heroin. And, after that, it was kind of like, okay, well, let's do this together. Nobody needs to know. Come to find out, she was struggling with addiction for quite some time, in and out of rehabs herself, difficulties at home, living with different family members. But ultimately, again, I say it was my choice, regardless of what it was, naive to what could come from it. I didn't understand addiction, nor did I realize that it was so close to home.
So one, I appreciate your vulnerability, right? Because I can only imagine what it's like to go through something like that. And one of the things that I lean on when you go in difficult situations, sometimes you don't think there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? Sometimes you think this is you. There is no getting better. This is what my life is going to look like. And it reinforces some of the negative feelings you already feel about yourself. I'm curious to know, Mary, when did you start to see there's a better opportunity for me, or I can get over this hump in my life and then begin to become a huge contributor back to society? When did you begin to see that light that's at the end of the tunnel?
Wow. Well, I have to say, I agree with what you said completely, that you think that this is going to be your life. And for most of that 12-year period, I felt this is it. I don't see a way out of this. It's too painful. I had several attempts at recovery, failed attempts, or short-lived attempts. I never had sobriety for more than 3 months straight. And it wasn't easy. And even when I had that, I was on methadone. So now I say I was still addicted. I was still taking an opiate every day, whether it was prescribed or not. I knew, though, I always knew that this wasn't going to be the end all be all for me. So early on, I didn't think about it more once I was involved with the federal prison system. And the way I was treated and spoken to by probation officers, by prosecutors, people in the system, they were very condescending to me. And oftentimes I would hear that I was a hopeless drug addict. I would never amount to anything. And it would be nearly impossible for me to pull through this. So I think that would trigger me to think, these people don't know who I am. I'm smart, I'm talented, I have love to give. And even through my addiction, I still saw myself helping people. There was a brief period I was homeless, and I was trying to navigate services on my own, which was very difficult. A lot of closed doors, a lot of rejection. And through that, trying to help other people as well that I would meet on the streets, and helping them better themselves, even though I was down myself. So through it all, I knew I'm better than this. I just couldn't see the way out.
So what did you see, or when did you see the way out, and what did that look like for you?
When I saw it was during my last incarceration. I went in on a technical violation. It was my dirty urines. I couldn't stay clean. I mean, I probably could, but it was very hard for me. And I have to say, I tried really hard, but it's difficult to do while you're home. And I went away to programs, and in these programs, there were drugs. And even though most of the time I didn't use, the last program that I was sent to, I did. And I just felt like giving up. I remember at that point, I said to my probation officer, just send me back to jail. I'm sick of this. And she said, well, it's not that easy. And I said, well, you guys say I'm hopeless, so whatever, just send me back to jail, let me do my time, and I'll come back home and be hopeless. But I'm sick of jumping through hoops and hurdles. I was working under the table, which they said wasn't acceptable. So I enrolled in school full time. but I still worked under the table because I had to work. I had to pay for my addiction somehow. And joining, a drug court program where we had homework to do every week, regular check-ins with probation. I was always back and forth, back and forth. I was drained, community service. I mean, you name it. It was exhausting. And I didn't feel supported. I didn't feel hopeful. I didn't feel motivated. And even through everything I was doing, I mean, I did go back to school. I was getting straight A's, and they would say, "I don't understand. On paper, you look great, right? But here we are. You can't pass a drug test. This must be the only test you can't pass, right?"
True. Wow.
Right. And I laugh about it now, but at the time, I would cry. I would cry. I would cry. And my probation officer, most of the time she'd be tough, but there were times where she would cry too. And I felt bad because she'd say, I don't get it. Like, what can I do to help you? And I would literally say, I don't know. I don't know. Most of my adult life, I was living addicted to drugs. I didn't know. And it was hard. It was painful, of course. Most addictions to pull through, you hurt, right? Because you become physically addicted. So it's not easy, and it's not meant to be. But back to your original question.
Right.
My last period of incarceration, all the pain I went through pulling through that addiction was my pain point. And it's funny because just last week I was speaking with my supervisor, and we were talking about, some of the people we work with, the population, and he mentioned pain points and, some of them not reaching that point yet and how difficult it is to help them if they're not ready. And I said to him, I remember my pain point, and that was mine, because it was so difficult that I said to myself, well, you know what? Now I'm going home completely clean. No use in ever feeling like this again. And why would I ever want to? No matter what. And I know why people use drugs. I get it. At that point, yes, I was hurt, but I wasn't as hurt as some of the life situations I've had to go through as an adult. And facing that sober, I understand why people choose to numb themselves. I would personally never do it again because I know the consequences and the pain that come from that. But for those that are still struggling, I get it.
So I think one, you touched on something that's really important, right? Like a lot of times we think, oh, well, this person is taking this drug because they don't want to face, but in actuality, it's not that they don't want to face, it's just what they're going through is so difficult, right? And that numbing agent helps. But as a sober person, you're like, you still face those same kind of challenges, right? I'm curious about going through those different kind of cycles in life. I imagine, or at least I know for myself, it creates some negative self-talk, right? Like where you gotta talk yourself down because you're like, look, I'm used to taking this pathway and now I'm trying to take a different pathway. When did you recognize that you were able to build more more positive outcomes or create more positive outcomes versus you kind of just triggering back to your original approach to solving issues or dealing with problems? When did you recognize you can say, you know what, I'm going to do this instead of doing that?
Pretty early on. I think while I was still incarcerated, the last prison I was at was in Philadelphia. And once I got there, I had kicked the worst part of my detox, right? So, and it's funny, I'll say it now, but the first two prisons where I was Rhode Island and Oklahoma. And in those prisons, I was kind of hoping, oh my gosh, I wish that someone had something to take the edge off to make me feel better. And if somebody would have presented me with a drug at my first prison, I would have likely used it to feel better. But by the time I got to the third, there were girls who were using, it was mostly Suboxone and methadone. and they would get it illegally. They used to fish through the toilets for it. And I'd be like, oh, at this point, my mentality, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. My mentality was like, oh, that's gross. That's cringy. Why would you do that? Where it had you offered it to me 2 months back, it might have been a different story, right? So in that prison, there was a lot of difficulties I would see with other girls. And even the ones who had never used a drug before would start using drugs there. And I remember one girl, she said, I don't know how much time I'm facing. I'm nervous. I'm scared. I feel like, using. And I would say to her, no, like, that's not the answer. You're so strong. If you've made it through, I think she was there for a year already. If you've made it through the period of time here so far, you can make it through whatever's coming your way. And I'll admit that's a very anxious feeling to have, because one of my first relapses was when I was facing my federal prison time. Somebody had said to me, well, your co-defendant just got 15 years. How does that make you feel? And I was home on pretrial supervision after my first state incarceration. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even tell you how overwhelmed I felt. I couldn't sleep. And it wasn't long before I relapsed. So I totally understood what this girl was going through, but helping her through that. And another girl I became close with in prison, she had lost her father while we were incarcerated. And I couldn't imagine the pain, but I prayed for her. I prayed with her, and, turning to God instead of another outlet, a substance, that helped me a lot. So by the time I came home, there was difficulty. There were sleepless nights, especially in the halfway house when I first came home. I would think to myself, I don't know where I'm going to start. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I've never lived in society as an adult without using drugs. How is this going to look for me? And I remember the halfway house saying, well, the Bureau of Prisons wants you to be on some kind of medication to help you stay clean. And I'd say, well, I'm already clean. What's the point of giving me anything now? And they said, well, just try it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I tried the Vivitrol shot, which is a blocker. It's not an opiate, it's not a narcotic, so you're not getting that into your system, but it does change your brain chemistry. And I remember trying that and feeling so depressed. Like, I felt good coming home. Like, I'm ready, even though I'm nervous. Like, I feel good. I feel great. I've never felt this like myself before. But when I tried that, it messed me up in my head, where I would call the doctor's office and tell them, hey, I don't know if this is the medicine, but this is how I'm feeling. I'm unmotivated. I'm depressed. I was having suicidal thoughts, which wasn't normal for me. And they said, oh my gosh, well, how long were you clean? I said, well, I've been clean for 11 months now, 10, 11 months. And they said, oh, geez, maybe you shouldn't have done it. This is for people who are newly sober, and it rewires your brain. It does some kind of rewiring, so it makes you not want the drug. But I don't know what it really does to people who have been clean for so long and already don't want the drug. So I said, well, you know what? Please put this in your notes, because I'm not taking it.
Like, no more.
They understood. And after that, I said, I'm not putting anything in my body anymore.
So I want to be real clear so I can understand. This the last time. How did you kick it? Was there any outpatient, inpatient, or you just did it yourself?
This last time, I did it I kicked it cold turkey in prison.
And you spoke on that earlier, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And actually, let's actually take a step back for a second for those, because there are those that will be watching that may not understand heroin addiction. What's the process from using heroin to methadone to some of the other medications that you've used to get off of heroin? What is the connection? What is that process? And typically, what should it look like? Because the next question is going to be, shouldn't prisons have something there to help those, some sort of, I just kind of want to talk about that. If you can kind of explain that a little bit, because I'm sure some may not understand.
Sure, definitely. So I'll talk about what my experience was and probably what it should have been. So typically, and God, I don't even know if there's heroin out there anymore. It's all like fentanyl and synthetic
Yeah,
opioids. And
yeah.
I mean, like I shared, I was last addicted to fentanyl. I don't think that there was even any heroin in my system. But when I was first addicted, I think it was about a year and a half or two before I sought help. And that was not really because I wanted to stop. I didn't really understand how to seek help. I knew that rehab was potential, but I also, from what I had heard, rehab was expensive. And my family, and not to put any blame on them, but they were very like hush hush about my addiction. Eventually there was no hushing it because I was
Mhm.
arrested and in the
Right,
paper and everything.
right.
But I first went to a detox program. So that's typically what you should do to get off of a drug, right? You go into detox for about a week or so just to get you cleaned off the drug. And after that, you should go inpatient to, let's say, a 30 to 90 to 6 month drug program just to learn coping skills, get counseling, get the support, build a foundation to keep you in recovery, right? I didn't do that. After my first detox, I think it was in 2010 or 20, I was referred to an outpatient clinic, which was a methadone clinic. And from what I had been told by people, they said, don't get on methadone. You're going to be on it for the rest of your life.
Mm.
And I had no idea. I followed the counselor's suggestion at that time. And she said, well, we're going to introduce you to this 6 month taper program. And what you have to do is you have to have, a parent or family member you live with come in and sign a waiver. So that's how serious this
Sheesh.
medication is.
Sheesh.
Mm-hmm.
A waiver.
A waiver. So my mom, and she still remembers, they had her come in, show her ID, sign a waiver saying that, she understood I would now be on this strong medication. And if God forbid anything happened, they knew what was going on and they knew what I was on. So that's how serious it was. I did the 6 month taper program in hopes that by the end of the 6 months, I would be free from drugs and everything. And I did stay clean for about 2 months, I think. But after the 6 months was up, they said, we suggest that you get on the maintenance program, which means you'll be on methadone for as long as you need to be to hopefully get you to stop using drugs, and we'll get you to the correct dose because, you're so addicted that this is what you need.
Mm.
And I said, okay, whatever. I did groups there. I would go to, weekly or bi-weekly groups there. IOP I tried, but it was never anything consistent. And again, I did not go inpatient. Time went by. I was in the criminal justice system, put on probation. They suggested inpatient. And I said, no way, I'm not going away. And okay, whatever, do community service instead. Right? That's what I did. It wasn't until I was pre-trial in the federal system that I went to my first rehab. I did 4 months there, and I stayed clean for those 4 months. As soon as I came home, it wasn't even a couple of weeks before I relapsed. And then a cycle where I was on probation. They sent me, okay, let's try again. We'll send you away for 30 days. Did that, came home. I think within the week I relapsed. And at this point, it was fentanyl. So I remember that transition also. Coming home right away in my first relapse being on fentanyl, I overdosed. And from what I remember, that was the first overdose I ever had.
Mm.
If I wasn't around people that had Narcan, God only knows. So it was difficult, but like I see with so many people now, and it's crazy because on the other side of the coin, I've had to Narcan people sober that I didn't even know in the community. Mm-hmm. And them wake up and say, why did you Narcan me? I'd be like, are you crazy? Like because you would be dead.
Absolutely right.
And you just don't see past it because you're still so stuck. Now, the second part of your question was why the prison systems don't have it. They do. So the state prisons do offer a methadone program. And it used to be that you had to be on the drug already for you to be eligible to get this medication in prison. But now you can go in addicted to pills, heroin, fentanyl, anything, and you are eligible to be given this medication. And I recently heard that the federal prison system is offering it now as well. They weren't at the time when I was there. They were just like piloting it, starting it off because some of the girls would get Suboxone, but now they offer all of it. And I was speaking at a rehab when a girl told me, and she said, well, they offer it now. I said, oh, I don't know if I'm happy to hear that. Because I know what helped me was not having it. And as painful as it was, it saved my life. Because if I had been given methadone when I went into prison, I'm not sure I would have stayed sober coming home. I think when you're getting the same drug in your body, you're still going to crave the drug that initially led you to that. And that's why it was so hard for me to get clean and stay clean when I was initially on the methadone program, because I was still being fed that drug in liquid form in a different way, but the brain body connection is still there. So you're craving that narcotic. And I hate to see, how many girls, especially men too, come home now addicted to this drug. And to them, it's normal. But to me, I still see that addiction. I see the hurt, and I see that they're not themselves.
So I think that's a great segue into kind of like my next question, because I know you said even when you were going through that difficult phase, you still had a heart to help, right? And if anybody knows Mary, man, Mary will give every single ounce of herself to make sure somebody else has a piece left of themselves. I've witnessed it from being in meetings and seeing the things that she's doing with families.
Right.
Like, when did you, well, I guess a two-part question. When did you see yourself getting into a professional service industry where you're helping out people who have went through a similar space? And then how does your experience going through that help you relate, connect, empower other people that maybe experience something similar to yourself?
So before I went in, I was introduced to a local nonprofit, Women Against Mass Incarceration. WAMI is their acronym. And the leader, the founder there, Tahiba, she was a great support system for me. She was one of the first people who called me out on my BS, and she recognized, without me telling her, I was volunteering at her organization after one of the rehab programs I had been through during COVID. I started helping her out, and she was so appreciative of me. She saw me, she saw my potential, she saw my skill set, and I was able to contribute to her organization. And I loved what she was doing. I loved the thought of helping other women pull through similar situations, helping anyone that was facing the legal system, as I was still on probation. But everything she saw, she also saw that I was struggling with addiction. And she shared with me that she had at one point someone close to her struggle with the same thing. And she recognized it. And she said, I know what you're going through. I know what you're doing. And I still, I was trying to be a functioning addict, but there's no such thing. There's no such thing. And I'd say, what do you mean? And in that candid conversation, she was one of the people who told me, hey, why don't you just, I see what the system's doing to you. Why don't you just go serve your time, get it over with? If you want to come home and, keep using, you can do that. But just, go get it over with. I remember thinking, what are you talking about? Why would I go back to jail and come home? But the way she said, and I know her intention in saying it, right, was for me to realize that.
Right.
So
The desired response out of you.
Right. So she spoke to me not in a way to put me down. She spoke to me like I was at her level. And I was often talked down to. I wasn't often built up. I wasn't often spoken to on the same level as people. And it felt good that I was helping someone. But she said, you can't really help anyone if you don't help yourself first.
Very true.
And we would talk about, hurt people. you have to pull through this first. And I said, okay. Well, eventually, the plan wasn't according to the system for me to go back that way, but I worked with her for quite some time. I was actually the first employee she had at her organization.
Oh, get
And
out.
yeah, I loved doing it. And I think that's where she saw my passion for helping other people. So I had worked before that, I was doing like CNA work in different ways, helping people, but not quite, using my own experience to help people.
Mm-hmm.
So after I worked with her, I said to her, I remember they were like, you either got to go away or you're going to go back to jail. And I would say still, just send me back to jail. Oh no, you got to try it our way. You got to do it our way. So I went away to a program and I said to her, I'm sorry. She said, don't be sorry. We'll survive. We'll be fine. We'll be here. And we're going to we're going to welcome you with open arms when you return. So I went to this program. I was there for a couple of weeks, maybe not even a month, got violated, went back to prison. And I would stay in touch with her. I would talk to her. While I was away, I had the opportunity of, helping other women. I did a Bible study group, and I remember even though I didn't qualify or need some of the services, such as GED classes, there were women who didn't speak any English. And I remember offering my help to the first woman and saying, hey, I can help you with your homework. She was doing a parenting class, actually, and her GED. All of her homework was in English. So I started off translating for other women in prison and then helping other women who might have spoken English but didn't read very well or write very well, and giving little classes in that sense, tutoring, mentoring, however I could help, right? When I came home, I remember I was in the halfway house and, calling Tahiba, and she said, what do you need? I'll bring it to you. And I said, well, you know what? Bring me my laptop, because that way I can help you. And she'd tell me, no, focus on yourself. I said, no, this is what I want to do. I can't sit here not doing anything effective. So she said, okay, you could start off the groups again. And at that point we were doing, and she still does them, I believe, groups with Yale students, right? Ironically, full circle. So we were working with the Yale undergrad prison project students. And I remember I was like a week home, helping to run the groups, and it felt good, right? It also felt even better to know that, my position was still there, because that was a huge concern for me. After my first incarceration, getting back into the workforce was really hard. And Marcus, this is something you know much about. A lot of closed doors. I think I mentioned I was working under the table. So I was waitressing, bartending, babysitting, anything I could do, I was doing it. But, Tahiba held my position, and I went back into the nonprofit organization sector. I remember she had me speak at a press conference for her. I think that's the first time I met my now supervisor. And I had all the while I had an ankle bracelet on me.
Wow. How ironic, right? Wow.
Right.
So now, currently, how many years have you not used? Have you been clean?
So I'm going on 3 years in May. I've been home.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've been home for 2 years. Actually, a couple of days ago was my 2 years home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Big congrats to you. Well, let me ask, how and why?
How I stayed home, or
Yeah, how and why did you reach this 2-year mark?
I have to say it was my come to Jesus moment, right? In prison. And I'm not the most religious person, I'm certainly not a saint, but I have to give credit where it's due. And it was really God. It was my faith in myself. But that cleaning out that I had to go through, God knew that's the way I needed it, right? He sat me down. He cleaned me out in the way that I needed most. And again, I'll say it was difficult. It was painful, but it was exactly in the way I needed to go through it. Because despite the multiple arrests that I had along the way, despite being arrested by the DEA in a horrifying way, that still wasn't enough to stop me. And I was hurting others. I was hurting myself. I wasn't even a thought in my brain, right? I thought about, let me help everyone else. I don't care about myself. I had no self-esteem. I had no love for myself. I had no idea what that would even look like, right? But getting cleaned out that way, I came home with clarity. I could see clearly, and I had never seen that way or lived that way before.
Wow.
Again, I didn't know myself. And people would say to me often when I returned, oh, you've changed, you're a different person. But I felt like, well, this is who I was before drugs.
Yes.
But you never knew that person. So I don't blame you. You know, it was still the same morals and values deep down, but people couldn't see that because, like one of the prosecutors said about me one time, she said, you know, you're manipulative and deceitful and a hopeless addict. And I remember thinking, like, I cried because I felt like I'm none of those things.
That's
I'm a
not
good
me.
person.
Right.
Right. But they hadn't seen that person. So I don't blame them. Still, helping myself has helped me to help others. It's helped me to move forward. And sometimes I feel like I might have been moving too fast, but other times I feel like, well, no, I'm actually taking it slow because I wanted things fast paced. I wanted it right away. I wanted the instant gratification. And I still have to often remind myself, look at how far you've come. And it's that faith. And not to say I haven't had struggles, right? We're human. But now I face those struggles sober and with a clear mind. And I know that if I could get through that, I can get through anything.
It's a great point because a lot of times you feel hopeless, right? When you're in those difficult moments and you need something to grab a hold to, right? Because you know if you don't find that thing to grab a hold to, you're going to go right back to whatever it is that you used to, right? But now, right, everyone knows the Mary that we see on screen, the Mary that's smiling, that's helping, that has such a positive reputation, right? How did you build that positive reputation? Because I imagine when you are in a dark space, doing dark things, going back to what you said about what the prosecutor said, people see you as something completely different, right? How did you begin to build this different perspective, this different image of who you are?
So something I did often when I was in active addiction and trying to get clean but couldn't was I would suppress myself. I put myself down because I would believe what other people said about me. And I was also very ashamed of the way I was living. I wasn't thrilled to be told, oh, you're great on paper, but in person, you know, or you're a great student and you're great at this. And I'd say to myself, like, I hate this about me. I know, and I know I'm capable, but I couldn't feel that within myself. So not only believing in myself, but not caring what people think about me now. Because there's nothing you can tell me about myself that I don't already know. Seriously. I mean, then you could, you know, say I was a heroin addict and a lot of people own it. A lot of people are like, yeah, I'm a drug addict, so what? But that wasn't me. I was like, oh my God, don't look at me. I hate who I am. I was ashamed. Shame was who I was. Because I would cry and cry and cry, like, why can't I get it? But today, you know, yeah, I was an addict.
Today
Yeah.
you rabbit from 8 Mile today?
Right.
I got you.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right.
That's amazing.
And I don't let it hold me down or hold me back. Yes, I've been to prison. It's not something I'm necessarily proud of, but yeah, I'm proud because I made it through. You know, I'm not proud of the record that I carry, but hey, yes, I am because all that and still I'm here today. So I don't let that weigh me down. And, you know, people might take me off sometimes. We're human, right? People might say hurtful things, we feel, but again, there's nothing you could tell me about myself that I don't already know. And I'll be the first one to tell you, you know?
Mary, let's talk support. I
Mhm.
mean, honestly, this is an amazing story. I look at, you can never judge a book by its cover. I mean, because, you're not wearing what you've been through whatsoever. And you've been through a lot.
Thanks.
Let's talk support. If you had to choose one person throughout this entire journey that, you may have felt, was there for you, it could be two. Just who would you give that, who would you call out? Who would you mention?
So I'm going to say two, right? One of them being my sister, and the other one being Tahiba.
Mm.
Because, like I shared before, and I might get teary eyed, but
Oh, that's okay.
Tahiba treated me in a refreshing way that I needed. She called me out on what I was doing and how I was living and didn't treat me any differently because of it. So most of the time I was used to being called out on my BS, but and treated like that, right? So I was treated like an addict. But with her, I would still come to work. She knew, she never, and she'll still say, I don't think I ever saw you messed up. You never brought that to work with you. And I still tried, I try to be a functioning human being.
Right.
But the support that she gave me and the belief she had in me, even when returning home, and pushing me to be my best self. I'll go back to that press conference. My supervisor a couple of weeks ago said, I was wondering, who is this confident young girl? And in my head, I was like, confident. I was so nervous. I was anxious. I was speeding through my speech. I had an ankle monitor on me. I was scared, but pushing me into environments like that so that I could gain that confidence, because again, that's what helped me. And I say my sister because I'm actually at her house now.
Okay.
But she's
Big
someone who
sister,
had it
little sis.
younger, but
Little sis,
almost,
okay.
I'll say almost like she's older, because she's been the voice of reason oftentimes, right? And she had to go through the worst of it alongside my parents, right? But treating me now like who I've become. So having that support.
You're awesome, Mary.
Wow.
You're awesome. Kind of taking that same question but flipping it on the backside. What I'm hearing is it takes, regardless of what a person goes through, a monumental point in a person's life is still being treated like a human being, right?
Mhm.
We're in the service industry, an industry where people say they want to help, yet and still they're always introduced to people that see you as who you were, right?
Right.
What advice would you give to a partner, an employer, a parent, right? A friend who sees someone in a really difficult space, but see them as that thing, right? See them as that drug addict, that felon, that drug dealer, right? What advice would you give them on how to still see them as a person and treat them as a person, even though they're experiencing something difficult?
Where do I begin?
Mm.
So, we are definitely more than our past choices. I don't like to use the word mistakes because we make mistakes all the time, right? But at the point in time where we were living, we made choices, right? In that poor mindset, in that clouded judgment, we made choices that fit our lifestyle at the time. We're more than that, and we can pull through that. There's still a person in there, a beating heart, a feeling body. We're all human. And if you don't treat people with that dignity, they will never believe that they are valued, or they will never believe in themselves. Like I had mentioned earlier, I believe what people would tell me about myself. And it was hard because I was already so beaten down, beating myself down more. You have to know that there's more to a person than their past, right? And that everyone's capable of redemption. I like to say that people who have been through difficult circumstances are even more resilient. People with a record have even more to prove and will work even harder than those who might not have it. And I also say you're one choice away from becoming that same person. We all commit crimes at one point in our life. Some of us get caught for it. Some of us don't. But we're all human. We're all capable. And we all have something to contribute.
Mhm.
So just remember, especially those who are still struggling or have family members who are still struggling, the person you love is still in there and they have so much to offer. And be patient. You know, for everyone, it's different. For some people, they need tough love. For some people, they just need love and acceptance. But no matter what, don't turn a person away because this life has its expiration date, right? You never want to go to sleep thinking, I should have treated them better or I should have given them that chance, because that's what could potentially save a life or change a life.
Wow. Wow. Mary, it's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. We want to respect your time. It's about a solid hour, almost there. It's been so insightful talking to you. You're a breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
Yes, like so amazing. And I know many of the things you've said today, people will benefit from. I benefited from it. So it's an honor to have spoken to you today. Who you are yesterday, during, and today is beautiful. I know that the future is bright for you, and I cannot wait to talk to you again and catch up with you in a year or two and continue to see all the great things that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And likewise, it was awesome talking with you guys. I hope that, and I always hope that some part of my story can help somebody else pull through. Because again, I was that hopeless young person who would never change. And it took me some difficulty, but nothing worth having comes easy. Right? And any way I can help, I'm here.
For those watching, how can they contact you?
So I'm on social media, Facebook and Instagram, Mary Epiphany. That's EPIPHANY. And that's my middle name. It's kind of an epiphany that I'm here today in this way, right?
No pun intended.
Or LinkedIn, Mary Valdovinos.
Amazing.
Before you go, I always tell people there's 3 different kind of people that we're looking to touch. We're looking to touch the people that's going through it. We're looking to touch the people who are connected to those people and the people that are on the outside looking in, right? What message do you want to leave to one of those groups today? I ask that you mention them out. I ask that you mention the group, and I ask that you leave the message with that group.
So I guess this is to everyone not going through it themselves, but looking to help other people and looking to make an impact. We all have the potential to help another person. And like I said before, we're one choice away from being that person ourselves. Inspire, love, support. Lift as you climb if you've been through it yourself. Never forget anybody and always spread positivity and love. That's what we need, right? Uplift, unite, collaborate, come together because we can make a difference for somebody else.
Lift as you climb, huh? I
Lift
like
as
that.
you climb.
Mary, it's been a pleasure to get just to kind of spend more time with you, get to know you on an even deeper level, right? I see the work you do. I hear about the work you do. You know, you're phenomenal professionally, and it's great to know where that energy comes from and why it's so authentic. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Okay, Mary, I will see you on Monday.
Right.
Okay.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Next time, you got to get her out of there.
Stop.
Sorry, it's recording. We could edit. It's fine.
All right.
You can stop it. It's fine.